What steps has the American Board of Urology taken to reduce certification-related burdens for urologists?
Well, you know, Ben, that we've had quite a pandemic going on here. People that are concerned about their families, their practice, certainly worried about their patients. So we've tried to reduce the administrative burden. One thing that we did for the folks that took the recert examination that just came up, they had remediation CMEs. Try to make sure that those were all available either online or through some webcast so that people didn't have to go to the annual meeting. That obviously was canceled. Additionally, we've also tried to reduce and actually eliminate some late fees that were coming in, especially for annual certification fees. We've now extended with no late fee all the way to July. So we're trying to make sure we reduce the financial burden also. The log submissions, people that are recertifying this year in year 7, 8, or 9 of their cycle, we've asked if possible of people that are in their first year, and they've got 3 to do it, if they could just say, let's put this off for a year and do next year. But some have called in and said, hey, look, I've got more time now than I've ever had because I'm sitting at home. A lot of my elective cases are canceled. And so in those cases, we've basically said, what we'd like for you to do then is try to meet the deadline, but we're going to extend it 1 month. Interestingly, we've got about 500 applications. We already have over 400 logs that have come in. So people are getting their logs in. We've tried to make sure too that we are continuing to take those phone calls. Everyone has always sort of given us, I think, a lot of praise for making sure that a human answers the phone when they have a concern. A log submission, some late date, what are we doing with qualifying examination? That has had an awful lot of interactive chatter back and forth. We've elected to change the qualifying examination for graduating residents so that it's now going to be either in January or February. Pearson centers have all basically canceled and shut down for until April 30th. They're now telling us that maybe it'll be longer than that, possibly the end of May. To prevent people from being concerned, we said, well, let's just try to reschedule in January or February. We can't get a date yet. Pearson has held off on that because they have so many exams that they're trying to reschedule. But we are trying to make sure that everyone understands we're listening to you. We're keeping our finger on the pulse. We're flexible. We do not want to make this harder on you at this time. We want to actually ease that burden. So those are some of the things that we've done, and we'll continue to make changes as this thing extends, Ben.
Thank you. And what challenges has the COVID-19 pandemic presented for the ABU, and how are they being addressed?
You know, we've got a small office. 8 people in that office answer phone calls for 12,800 diplomates. That's a lot. And we've prided ourselves on making sure that when people call, as I said, they get a person on the line. With that, we're all working remotely. So everyone in Charlottesville is working remotely. I'm working remotely. It has presented a lot of challenges, a lot more phone calls, making sure we're staying connected, making sure that people have encrypted computers and phones at home so that we can be secure, but also we are also attentive to any questions that they might have. You know, the work still goes on. So working remotely has been one big challenge. Secondarily, worries about our own families. You know, most of the people in that office have young children. And because of that, they're trying to have them at home at the same time they're working, at the same time they're trying to help their spouses and decrease their exposure. So I'd say that the challenges that the American public have seen and the practitioners, we've all seen too. We're all trying to make sure we're doing our part, but not letting the diplomates down. So that's been a big challenge for us. Also the rescheduling. I mean, Ben, you wouldn't believe how many things we're having to think about to reschedule. Exams that were already scheduled, ideas for how do we do this if this extends even further? You know, what do we tell trainees if they miss some of their training? As a board, what are we going to say? Well, we're trying to work very closely with the programs and with the ACGME, so that to do the residency review committees, to make sure that we're working hand in hand so we don't punish people during this time. So it's been a moving target. We've had to remain flexible. We want to make sure we maintain our standards, but by the same token, we also want to make sure that we're not increasing the burden. So we've had a lot of challenges, like everybody.
What are you hearing from practicing urologists in your own area and across the country in terms of the pandemic's impact on their practice and their patients?
Yeah, I have heard some already say that there's been a financial impact and they think that it'll continue. We've also heard some folks say, hey, I've got a lot more time right now than I had before. So I want to take care of whatever administrative things I need to do now for my recertification or certification, and I want to do it now. But I've also heard some folks say, we're being pulled to do shifts in the emergency room. We're being pulled as a faculty to help out on the front lines. We're concerned about that. Everyone's concerned about that. So we do recognize that we're all trying to pull in this together, but I think there's been a financial impact. There's been a time impact. There has been an impact on their family and their spouses. So there's no doubt in my mind that this has been something that is ubiquitous. I mean, we're seeing it everywhere. Every part of your life is being affected, and the practices definitely. I don't think the financial impact has been as profound for some, but the longer this goes on, the more we're going to see it.
What long-term impact do you think the COVID-19 pandemic will have on the use of telemedicine?
I'm hoping that that actually helps. You've heard my talk about robotics, artificial intelligence, telemedicine. I do believe that in the future, we're going to actually find that it's going to play a bigger part. You know, at least in rural America, when I was in Kansas in practice, we had a lot of outlying hospitals that had interest in doing telemedicine, asking us to consult. Said, we can't get a urologist. There's not one for miles, not one in this state. We heard that before. So they have asked us to do more consulting in telemedicine. There is the ability to do that. You have a number of telemedicine opportunities. It could be FaceTime, it could be robotics. So they do have bedside robots. It can read out from my screen, a patient, for instance, what their vital signs are, what their labs are for that morning. I can then give a consultation. I can look the patient in the eye. I could have a nurse by the bedside that helps me with an examination. From my standpoint, I think we're going to be relying on it more. And I think the technology is there. I think that we're being pushed into sort of this telemedicine experiment, as it were, right now. And I do believe that we're going to be a little more innovative with that in the future, so that as we have manpower issues that are actually growing because of this, we already knew we had one in urology, then my hope is that telemedicine helps us close that gap a little bit.
How will urologic research be affected by COVID-19?
That's a great question. I suspect that some basic science labs where you have people that have, you know, an area in the lab right beside a PhD, right beside a postdoc, right beside what they're doing with their microDNAs, I think those are going to be affected. I think a lot of research is going to slow if it's research outside the area of looking for a vaccine, looking for some way to actually help with COVID-19. So outside of that, would research in our cancers, would the work being done in NIH or NIDDK be affected? Well, I think just from the standpoint of the logistics of trying to carry it out, I think that'll be affected. Some outcomes research is definitely going to be affected, though. I mean, you can't have people together brainstorming in a room. They could do it, again, virtual, but some of that really takes getting together, talking about ideas, working with databases. Some of that may not slow down, but I suspect we're going to find things that were unintended that are going to come to a screeching halt. People may not be able to get reagents if they're in their lab. People may not be able to do certain things on the internet, especially as people stay home and the bandwidth isn't there to carry everything online. And there's certainly been problems receiving, getting, say, reagents, getting supplies. Some of those things will be affected in laboratories also. So I think it's going to have a profound impact. I'm not on the front lines with that any longer, but it is a good question, because I would suspect we're going to see some areas that are going to be affected. And it won't just be the database stuff. I think it'll be the reagents. It's going to be working in a lab. It's going to be working with someone that would be your PhD and an MD working together to try to come up with working with a particular cell line and working in a lab together. It's very important for those PhDs and MDs and postdocs to talk together. That's where the real research gets done. It's going to be difficult if those people are trying to do everything virtual and you can't really get to the lab together to sit down and discuss things. So I think it'll be affected. How much is going to depend on how long.
Now, you served in the military. Is there anything from that experience that you can apply to the current pandemic?
Well, I'll tell you one thing about the military right now that scares me is that most of my time in either airborne group You have small commando groups. You have a very close-knit group of folks that serve in different colored uniforms, but they're generally all in pretty close proximity. And as we saw on the recent aircraft carrier, if you've got 5,000, whatever it is, if they're Air Force, if they're Navy, if they're Marines, if they're Army, all of those folks are in a small city, a very confined area where if you start to get one person with COVID-19, it can spread like wildfire. I really feel for them right now. They're trying to do their best, but they're on the front lines too. I noticed that all 50 states have mobilized National Guard now. I mean, those guardmen, I think that we're looking at these people as not really first responders. They are, just like police officers, just like firemen, and they're putting themselves at risk. And many times they're being pulled in to do these sorts of things with very little pay, a lot of time away from family, and in close quarters. So personally, I really feel for a lot of the military families and personnel right now. And just got to keep them in our thoughts and prayers, and remember that these people are out there on the front lines. But that's my experience, is that we work in close units, and those units are at really increased risk.
What would you say the current situation has taught us about the importance of science to public health?
You know, I saw that's a great question, because I saw the recent, and I don't know where Bill Gates was when he gave this talk, but it was in 2015. And he said the biggest risk from a public health standpoint, and this is a man who's given away millions, obviously, for malaria, et cetera, a lot of public health issues worldwide. He predicted that our biggest risk was going to be a pandemic, and that we were very poorly resourced and prepared to take care of it. And it's just like right on. I mean, I can't say that the trumpet was sounded multiple times. You know, we've heard it over and over. The CDC said it, Bill Gates has said it, 2016, it was said over and over and over. And I think that what it's taught us is something like this can bring our economy to its knees. It can bring our healthcare system to its knees. It's overloading us right now. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. We need to be better prepared for these sorts of things. When you mothball a whole bunch of ventilators, you bring them out of mothball and find out a lot of them don't even work. That really is not a good resource for the people on the front lines or our ICUs. I think we were poorly prepared. Hopefully it teaches us that we won't get caught with our pants down in the future. And my hope is that in the future, we'll see this as, hey, if COVID-19 can do this to the entire world and the world economy and our healthcare system, we'd better be prepared for the next COVID-19.
Is there anything else you'd like to add? I know that was all the questions I gave you, but I wasn't sure if there's anything else you'd like to add.
You know, I just want to add to your readership that, you know, in times like these, whether it's the ABU, it's the AUA, it's Urology Times, we're a very small specialty. We're all in this together. We're here to support each other. We're not here in any way to work in a contentious manner. We want to only help. But, you know, missions have to go on, and we're going to see the other side of this sometime in the future, hopefully come out of it. It may be in a very different looking world. Hoping that everyone, I want to send a message. I hope that everybody stays safe. You know, thoughts and prayers for everybody out there, especially those that are going to be pulling shifts in the ER and on the front lines and are being exposed. So thank you for having me here, Ben. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.